I was trying to come up with an intro for this, and considering it's about airplanes and flying, I debated about making a paper airplane, but I've never been very good at making those, so I just decided to nix that. But I have Brenda. Brenda. I have her. She's good. She's a good girl. She got a bath yesterday and got to go to the groomer. So she's all nice and clean, and her claws are less stabby now, which is how she shows her love. She stabs me. My cute, adorable little psychopath. Not a psychopath. A puppy. Yeah, well. Okay. So, The Wind Rises came out in 2013, and it was supposed to be Hayao Miyazaki's last movie with Studio Ghibli, with him directing and writing and everything else, and he was going to retire afterwards. That didn't happen, because he's done at least one more in the form of The Boy and the Heron, which came out very recently. And I don't remember if there's another one within that time frame, because there's a good 10 years in there where I don't remember if he was retired or if he'd done something else in that time frame. I don't remember off the top of my head. But The Wind Rises was supposed to be Miyazaki's swan song. This came out in 2013, as I said, and I remember going to see it with my dad in theaters. It aired in theaters here. So that was, a nice thing to go and see with him. So it is the 19th film written and directed by Miyazaki and produced by Studio Ghibli. So it is actually, The Wind Rises is actually one of the kind of rare ones that actually deals with real people. Kind of like how Grave of the Fireflies dealt with a semi-autobiographical story about a boy who went through something very similar to what happens in The Grave of the Fireflies. And this one is very similar there, where it is about a real person who existed, Jiro Horikoshi, who was this aircraft engineer who invented the famous Zero fighter, which were used by the Japanese Navy during World War II. And I think they're the ones that were used to bomb Pearl Harbor. So there's that whole connection there, in regards to kind of setting off America's involvement in World War II. And the movie itself is actually based off of a book that was written in 1937 by Tasao Hori, who, the book is called The Wind Has Risen. And the whole setup for the movie is based around the life of Jiro Horikoshi, and then he has this kind of, in the movie and in the book, there is this fictional character, Naoko, who is ends up being his wife. In the story, The Wind Has Risen, she is his wife in that. He was married in real life, and they had several children together, but she is not Naoko. Naoko is based off of just this character that is this fictional character from the book. And the movie, The Wind Rises, is based off of that book. I think it was also based off of like a graphic novel version or so that was done by Miyazaki himself, that was adapted by Miyazaki himself, and then this. And as is very common knowledge for people who watch Studio Ghibli movies, Hayao Miyazaki loves airplanes, and he loves flying, and he loves air sequences. And when I was, working on stuff for this movie, I'm like, there are a lot of the movies throughout Ghibli itself, not just directed by him, but overall, that have flying sequences in them. The most famous one with the flying sequences, of course, is Porco Rosso, which is about, again, it's about airplane pilots. And everything like that, where they kind of make the airplanes these kind of living, breathing things. And in this one, they do a very similar thing where they have the airplanes in the movie seem to be, kind of living, breathing things that are being designed and made and flown and everything like that. And again, it's very beautifully designed sequences and everything like that, as is very common when it comes to Studio Ghibli movies in general. So before I kind of get fully into the story of it, this movie does take place over the course of about 20-ish years, because we start off with seeing Horikoshi as a child, and then we see him a little bit later on in like his, early, late teens, early 20s section, and then later on in his, late 20s into his 30s era, where he is designing these airplanes. And it goes through a bunch of the economic hardships in Japan during the 1920s and into the rise of the militarism in the 1930s. So it's kind of like his perspective of a lot of that stuff that's going on. This also involves Germany pre-World War II going into World War II. So there will be references to that in the movie, but I'm not going to actually say certain things. It's like I'm not getting monetized yet, but I don't want to get demonetized just because of it. So yeah, that would be fun. Going into the actual story, so kind of the story begins in 1918, which, if I did my math correctly, is I think actually the same year that my grandma on my mom's side was born. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Or she was born in 1916, one of the two. I can never remember which one. But she was born in that time frame. So slight connection there, I guess. But in 1918, we see a very young Jiro Horikoshi growing up in kind of rural Japan. He seems to come from a fairly well-to-do family, given the time frame and given the fact that they have this very nice traditional-looking Japanese house and everything. But Jiro has these amazing dreams of wanting to fly. And the movie starts basically with a dream sequence that is him flying around in this, airplane that he's kind of dreamt up, and getting to soar through the little town that he lives in. And again, it's like just beautiful flying sequences and everything. And then kind of the dream kind of turns more into a nightmare when we see this giant warship show up with missiles, with bombs, and that kind of causes him to crash. We also get the hint in the dream that he has very bad eyesight, because part of the dream involves like his eyes not working correctly, because in actuality Jiro has horrible eyesight, and he has to wear these, the huge thick, Coke bottle style glasses that we see him wear throughout the entire movie. So we get to see those. But he just has these amazing dreams of becoming a pilot, and he spends a lot of his time, he goes to school, of course, and he stands up to bullies and different things like that. And we get to see his mother and his younger sister, and, the younger sister, just kind of adores him and everything like that. But she's also very much, very bossy in her own right, but she's very cute, and she obviously loves her brother, and he loves her. But one of the things that he loves to do is he loves to get these different aviation magazines that come in. And while they are in English, he does have like a dictionary so he can translate them into Japanese so he can read them. And he has these, he reads about Giovanni Battista Caproni, who is this count, who is also this Italian aeronautical engineer and designs these amazing planes and everything like that. And Jiro reads about him in this aviation magazine. And he ends up having this dream where he basically kind of dream walks into Caproni's dream, and Caproni kind of dream walks into his dream. So they end up interacting, and so Jiro gets to run around on this plane type, on this plane that Caproni has designed. And we see them interacting with each other, and he's like, hey, he's basically like, what are you doing here? This is my dream. And Jiro's like, but I think this is my dream too. And he's just like, that's very interesting. And Caproni jumps off the plane, climbs down off a moving plane, and talks to him and everything like that. And they have this whole kind of conversation and everything. And one of the things that gets brought up in it is while they're discussing stuff, like in the dream, we get to see this beautiful aircraft that Caproni has designed, and he's like, yes, and it's going to be turned into a bomber and sent off and everything. And it is basically pointing out the fact that a lot of the times with aviation, as with a lot of other types of technologies, that they can very quickly be turned into instruments for war, into instruments to cause pain. And Caproni has a line of, airplanes are not tools for war. They are not for making money. Airplanes are beautiful dreams. And later on in the movie, they have several other conversations in regards to this throughout the course of the movie, and that's one of the things of the movie, is like what this is supposed to be pointing out. And I have a quote at the end of this review that is kind of Miyazaki's take on some of this as well, in regards to his own medium of animation. But I will get to that at the end. So they have that conversation, and what ends up happening is Jiro ends up asking him is, he's like, Mr. Caproni, may I ask you a question? I know I can't be a pilot because of my eyesight. If I'm not a pilot, can I still design airplanes? And Caproni is just like, Japanese boy. I'm not going to attempt to do an Italian accent. I apologize. I've been around planes all my life. You know how many I have flown? None. Not anyone. Many can fly a plane, but I design them. I create airplanes, and so can you, an aeronautical engineer. And and he's Jiro is just so excited about this, and Caproni is like, but remember this, Japanese boy, airplanes are not tools for war. They are not for making money. Airplanes are beautiful dreams. Engineers turn dreams into reality. And so Jiro is very energized by this, and he's like, I'm gonna become an aeronautical engineer. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna design beautiful planes and everything. And that's what he wants to do. And so we kind of see him having that dream and being very interested, being very, full, very devoted to it and everything. And then we kind of cut ahead by about 8 years or so to when Jiro is a young adult. He's like out of high school and partially was still working, for, getting, on his way to train, to, at university, and on his way to university, and he's on a train on his way to university. And while he's on the train, he ends up coming across this, beautiful young girl and her kind of, maid, nanny, whatever you want to call her. She's clearly, like, he's in, like, lower class, they're in, like, first class seating, and they're, both outside of the, on, like, the outside of the train, between the two train cars. And as they're going over a bridge, a wind keeps, a gust of wind happens, and she, his hat flies away. She grabs the hat, and he stops her from, falling off the train, along with, her and her maid, slash, nanny, whatever, stops them from falling off the train. And so they have, like, that interaction, and, like, the girl had spoken something in French, and she's like, it's a poem that I've read before. And, so they have, like, this little conversation, and then the maid, or the girl and the maid go back inside the train, and Jiro sits back down, and then he, like, kind of quotes the poem, and it's Le vent s'est levé, and basically the way that it ends up translating is, the wind is rising, we must try to live. It's kind of the way that it is. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is, very shortly after that, there ends up being this earthquake that happens. And the way that they show the earthquake in the movie is beautiful. It's basically, we have, like, the sequence where we see, like, part of the ground all cracking up, and then we just see, like, this ripple effect across like the landscape, and just, like, the houses being lifted and lifted and lifted and, like, destroyed by this, just, parts of their foundations and everything being destroyed, and, like, the train tracks getting, uprooted and everything like that, as the train is jostled around and everything. And so we see a bunch of that, and I love how they have that sequence animated. And so the train gets derailed, and after the earthquake, and everybody's like rushing off the train as fast as they can, and Jiro is trying to escape, and he sees that the little girl and their maid are kind of sitting on the ground, and they're not going anywhere, and he sees that it's because the maid has hurt her leg. She's actually broken her ankle, and so she can't walk. So what Jiro does is he picks her up and carries her away from the train for a little ways away from the train, and then he uses his slide ruler that he has, and uses that, as well as like one of his shirts, to like act as like a brace to pin her leg, so it's not going to be in quite as much pain and everything. And while this is going on, the little girl, whose name is Naoko, and she's the one that later on ends up becoming his wife. Big spoilers there. While this is going on, she's carrying his suitcase and his hat along, behind them, as he's, carrying the maid on his back, as they're, moving away from where the train is and everything. And he's like, "What about your luggage?" And she's like, "It's okay, don't worry about it, it's not important." And I like the fact that Naoko, even at that young age, is putting her maid's safety above, anything else, but also this young man is helping them. And so she's going to, make sure that his luggage stays with him. It's like, her and Naoko comes from a very wealthy family, so like her stuff can be replaced if it gets stolen or lost or whatever the case may be. But there's, nice young man is helping them, so she's going to be very polite to the nice young man. And he helps get them to a more safe area, with a bunch of these other kind of like refugees or people who are fleeing the city, because it's just outside Tokyo, and there's a fire is spreading in Tokyo at that point in time as well. So Tokyo is kind of getting burned down while all of this is happening because of the earthquake. I don't know if this is based off of a real event or not. I would think it would be a real event, in regards to how it plays a part in the movie, but I could be wrong. But so there's like a whole bunch of problems there, and he's like helping them. Jiro's helping Naoko and the maid and everything, and then they're like, the maid's like, well, it's a little bit much for him to carry her all the way back to where Naoko and her are from. So what he does is, he leaves the maid along with like his suitcase, with a bunch of the other people who can like at least keep an eye on her. A bunch of the other people who are like fleeing the train and fleeing out of Tokyo, and then he takes Naoko and she leads him into Tokyo and into the area where she lives, and then she's reunited with her family and the household, and then they send two guys with Jiro to go and get the maid, and so that way the maid can get carried back to the house and everything like that. And then, Jiro just kind of leaves after that. He doesn't even like tell them his name necessarily. He just leaves. He had mentioned something about being on the way to like the university. So it's a little bit, they get a little bit of a hint of that, but like they don't know who he is. He's just this nice young man that helped them in this, very important time of need and everything. And he makes his way to where the university is, where he runs into his friend Hongo, and the building is kind of on fire. The building itself and the campus are kind of on fire at this point in time, and so there's they saved a bunch of the books out of the library, and they're trying to help like put out any stuff that any fires that are starting on the books. And we see like embers flying in the air. There's even a point where like a door gets blown through the air, and Hongo's like, a flying door, you don't see that every day. And so we're having that, and then there's another moment in here where Jiro ends up seeing this postcard that is like about Caproni, and he's like seeing the postcard, and he kind of has like this another like connection thing to Caproni, where we cut to where Caproni is, and he's built this beautiful, like, 9-wing, whatever, setup plane that he wanted to design so that way he could, like, fly across the Atlantic back and forth and carry so many people and have, like, this beautiful flying experience, like a flying version of, like, the Orient Express, I think is what his kind of thought was. And so that's, like, he's built this beautiful plane, and it's supposed to be this time where it's supposed to be, like, taking off for the first time, and they're, like, filming it, and it starts to take off, and it doesn't really get very far because it's just not well designed, and the fact that it just causes too much stress in certain areas just causes it to break on the wings. And Caproni is watching this as they're filming it, and he, like, grabs the camera and, like, pulls out the film and, like, throws the camera into the water and, like, destroys the film and everything like that. And, like, he kind of has, like, a small conversation with Jiro while this is happening. He's like, is the wind still rising? And Jiro's like, yeah, it's like gale force winds at this point in time, because he's trying to put out other fires and everything like that. And so they're having, they kind of, he never actually meets to Caproni. It's just this whole dream type of character that he's kind of, like, dreamed up based on Caproni, but it's still kind of, like, giving him inspiration. So they're doing that. So while he's at school, he ends up, him and Hongo become friends, as I said, and he, has, he's not the most social person, but, like, he still kind of makes some friends, and he's still very devoted to his work and everything like that, and his studies. And one day there ends up being a package that's delivered to him, and he opens it, and it's the slide ruler and the shirt that he had used to help with, tying the maid's leg. And he's like, oh, this was left for you at the school, and, blah, 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 blah. And it's, like, a note from, them saying, like, from Naoko and the maid saying, like, thank you and everything. And he, like, runs out of the school and tries to find them, but they're not there. And then his sister, Kaio, comes to visit, and they end up, she comes to visit him while he's living in Tokyo, and they have this whole conversation where he tells her what happened. They seem to have a pretty good relationship. And he tells her what happened, and she's like, did you ever try to go back and find them? And he's like, yeah, I did try to go back, like, after the fires were out. I went back to their home, where their home was, but it was all burned down. It was all gone. And I'm given the fact that he got this package, he's like, yeah, it's, that, they were safe. They managed to escape, so that was good. And him and Kaio are talking, and she explains that she wants to become a doctor. She wants to go to school for medical training. And he is very supportive of this. But their father is a little bit less supportive in the fact of, like, he doesn't want her living in Tokyo on her own. But while this is going on, we also see that, like, Tokyo is rebuilding itself and everything like that. And Hongo keeps kind of, like, criticizing everything, because Hongo is just like, yep, we're still building everything with wood. No metal in sight, and all the buildings look the same as they were. Hongo is very kind of, he is kind of pessimistic, but he's also, like, very much, how to put this, he's very critical of the fact that he thinks that Japan is kind of stuck in the past, that, they're not as military, or they're not as developed as other places around the world when it comes to planes and different things like that, that they have a lot of these, old-fashioned things that are still there, like only using, like, wood for the construction and different things like that he doesn't like, or certain elements for, like, how they design planes that just seem to be very behind the times and very much not up to date, like in Germany or in other parts of Europe or in the US or different things like that. And so we get that whole situation. Later on, we do have it that, we cut ahead a little while to when, Jiro is finished with school, and he makes his way to where he has been hired at the same place where Hongo was hired, which is an airplane design company, the Mitsubishi Corporation, and this is in 1927. And he ends up, we get to meet Mr. Kurokawa, who is kind of like his supervisor. It was very this curmudgeon dwarf, and he's very funny, and he's like very kind of like, yeah, he's very curmudgeon, and I've dealt with people that are like that, but he's very much like, this is your desk, it's important, no one likes it, maybe you will, put your hat over there and get to work, type of a thing. And he's like like that type of a boss. But we see, Jiro just like working very hard on like the different projects that he's given and everything, and even going like above and beyond on the different projects and everything. And he kind of has this he has this habit where he can like kind of visualize how like the plane would be flying, and that allows him to kind of determine that, okay, that would be like the point of failure based on this design, so what can I do to make it better? And so we have like these different sequences in the movie where it goes between like his imagination and picturing like this, the airplanes flying that he's working on the design for, and being able to determine that's the fail point, so I need to find a way to make it better so it won't fail the same way, or so it won't fail, period. And so he like comes up with all of these other alternative designs that they can use for like different parts of the plane to keep it from having so much like tension in certain areas and everything. And Kurokawa is a little bit like, why are you doing this? This is not the project you were given. And he's like, oh, the project that I was given is right here. And so we see Kurokawa and him and the guy who's the boss of everybody. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. They're all talking, and like he's like very impressed with like Jiro's work and everything. And we also have it where like Jiro will go and like actually inspect the planes themselves as they're being developed, so he can kind of figure out like, oh, this is what the problem is, so this is what needs to be the redesign on certain things and everything. Because he wants to be very hands-on and not just like making the blueprints and everything. He wants to be hands-on and like helping design it so it can be like the best type of plane it can be. So he's kind of very interested in that and everything. And there ends up being these other moments throughout throughout this time frame where like Jiro and Hongo have various conversations about a bunch of the other stuff that's going on around them, the economic hardships and different things like that. And one of the moments that happens is while they're working on the project, they take the plane out for the test flight, and they have oxen that they have to use to like take the plane out there because the flying track is so far from the actual workshop. They have oxen take the plane out there. And then, they're doing like the test flight of the plane and everything like that for like the military. They're watching it. They end up having this moment where unfortunately the plane does fly well, but it's not going as fast as they would like it. And the pilot tries to make it go faster by doing like this kind of like reckless speed dive, which unfortunately puts too much stress on different parts of the plane and causes it to, fall apart. And thankfully the pilot survives and he's able to eject and everything. And then we cut to where we see Mr. Kurokawa, because this was kind of like one of his plane designs that he'd been working on as like the leader of this, the Falcon Project is what it was called. And he's like, it's raining everywhere, and he's like looking over the wreckage, and Jiro's like, come on, Mr. Kurokawa, let's go back inside, we can look at it when it's all done and restart on the project too. And Kurokawa's like, no, don't bother. The military has decided to go with this other design from this other company instead. You actually are going to be going to Germany very soon, and you're going to go there and you're going to study the works of I think it's Dr. Juncker is I think supposed to be the name of the engineer that they're going to be going and studying in Germany and everything. So plan on that and get ready for that. He's like, okay. There's also this moment that just kind of shows like his kind of kind-heartedness, where one day when he's on his way home from work, he's getting while he's getting food very late at night, he asks the guy at the food stand about the kids that are standing out there. And the guy's like, yeah, their parents work until really, really late. And I kind of feel bad closing up sometimes, but I kind of have to. And Jiro kind of tries to share his food with them and tries to give them like the sponge cake that he has. And the sister of the group is very like suspicious of him and is actually like pulling the little brother away to go wait somewhere else. And this kind of makes Jiro a bit sad because he wanted to help them. And then Hongo's like, what were you expecting? She has no idea who you are when they get home, or when he gets home. And Hongo also just criticizes the fact that Jiro just like works himself so hard, but also like just eats, food that's not very nutritious for him, which is just kind of funny. So they have those ones, and then Hongo's also like, yeah, well, I'm gonna go get married in the morning, and then shortly after that we're gonna be heading for Germany. He's like, you're getting married? He's like, yeah, I am. You have to have a happy home life to have a happy work life, even though those don't always mix. So it's just like, he's getting married. And then we see them in Germany, and we get, again, that's like things that happen in most Studio Ghibli movies. There's beautiful landscape shots throughout this entire movie. And it's not just Jiro and Hongo, it's several other of the engineers and designers and everything like that have gone with them to Germany. What ends up happening is, of course, while they're there, they're looking over several of these different designs for like this giant bomber that they're going to buy and then modify for Japan to use. And now this is kind of going into like 1930s Germany, so you can kind of determine some of the stuff that's going on here. A lot of the German military don't want them seeing a bunch of their like proprietary information and everything like that, but they're like, we are here because Dr. Junker, who is like the designer of like the planes, wants us to be here, and we're supposed to study this stuff. So they kind of end up having those issues, and like they get to like be very amazed by like how this plane is designed and everything like that they're looking at, that they're going to turn into a bomber and everything. And so they have those those instances there that they're dealing with, plus what ends up happening is at one point while they're out wandering around at night, they end up kind of having like a run-in with like the secret police and everything. So there's some of that they have to deal with. They don't get trapped or anything like that, but they're like out and about. And what ends up happening is while they end up having what ends up happening is Jiro is very impressed by a lot of the different German engineering things and everything like that. And then Hongo is just like, yeah, Japan's still stuck in the past and everything like that. So he's still kind of like griping about that. And then it's Hongo is sent back to Japan to go and work on the bomber project. And Jiro is supposed to like travel around a bit. So we have this moment where he's like traveling by train, and he has another dream sequence where he ends up dreaming about Caproni again. And Caproni shows up on the train and like takes him out of the train and into this beautiful dream sequence area where he has like these huge planes that are flying off and everything, and he's dragging Jiro up into the plane and having them, he's like, this is this beautiful plane that I designed, and the Italian government is going to be using it to turn it into a bomber because they think bigger is better in this regard, and they're going to turn it into a bomber. And but it's there's like all of these other people on the ships, on the airplanes, and he's like, these are my workers and their families, pretty much our entire village. And like we see Caproni's family there and everything like that. So it's just like him showing off, these are all the people that me doing this is trying to help support. And I do this because I want to design these machines, but it's also giving these people a way of making a living and everything like that. And so we get some of those instances there. And as they're walking around on the plane, what ends up happening is Caproni ends up asking Jiro if kind of this concept of Would you rather live in a world with or without pyramids? And Jiro doesn't understand it at one point. And Caproni is like, would you rather live in a world with or without pyramids? Would you rather live in a world where there are these beautiful aircraft that you get to design and everything like that, but they can be used for these horrible things? Because it's like, you know, it's the whole concept of like the question is, you know, the pyramids themselves, as amazing and wonderful as they are, as far as we're aware, they were, you know, built using to a degree parts of, you know, slave labor and different things like that. And a lot of these other monuments in various places around the world during those time frames were built by the same method. So it's like, would you rather live in a world that didn't have all of these beautiful things in it, or live in a world that had it, but there's also this dark side to it? And you can't guarantee that that dark side won't be there. And Caproni is like, I choose to live in a world with pyramids because it allowed, you know, I have these dreams. I can't choose what's going to be, what my planes are going to be used for, but I am still going to design them and give them life. And being the One Piece dork that I am, I do kind of associate this with the way that, like, Tom taught Frankie and, you know, Iceberg in regards to, you know, you have to still be the one that will still take pride in your creations and everything like that, that as everybody else in the world may hate them, but you must take pride in your creations and everything. And I think that's kind of what that's supposed to be, because that is very true throughout all of history. You know, you look at like gunpowder, for instance. Gunpowder was initially, you know, created, and it had been created to be used for fireworks, and then it got corrupted and used for turning, you know, to create these, you know, huge explosions and everything like that that were used to create, you know, guns and other types of firearms and everything like that. Same thing with, you know, airplanes. You know, they were designed to be these beautiful flying machines. You know, the Wright brothers' intention was not to have them be used for war. That's what they got, you know, kind of corrupted and turned into. And that is kind of like one of the lessons of this movie, or the theme of this movie. And Caproni also makes this comment that, like, most artists are only creative for about 10 years, and my 10 years of creativity are just about finished. So, you know, enjoy your time in the sun and enjoy your creativity and everything like that. And, you know, so Jiro is, you know, very much enjoying that time frame. And, you know, what ends up happening is, you know, he goes back to, you know, he heads back to, you know, Japan after his travels, and he gets put on this new project. And during one of the test flights for the project, and he's been there for about 5 years at that point in time, during one of his test flights, unfortunately, the plane ends up crashing. And I think the pilot ends up being okay, but, like, the plane ends up crashing. And there's also this moment where, like, going into the project, that Jiro and Mr. Kurokawa end up traveling to, like, this, you know, kind of like an airship, you know, Navy airship out in the ocean, and they get splattered from oil from the engine, which is funny. And Kurokawa was like, these dang Japanese engines and everything like that. And then, like, we see them all cleaning up, and then we see them, like, watching on the runway as the planes are taking off, and one of the planes ends up crashing into the ocean. And so it's like they're supposed to be kind of studying sorts of the problems that are going on in this regard for being able to then, like, take off from, like, aircraft carriers and stuff like that. And Jiro is put on the project to be able to design, like, this fighter plane. And so he's kind of, like, working on a lot of that. And, you know, after the plane crash, he ends up kind of getting sent to the countryside, to, like, this very nice summer resort and everything like that, to, like, relax and recover and everything like that. And while he is there, one day while he's out just, like, exploring the area, he sees this girl up on a hill, and she's, you know, painting and everything with oil colors. And there ends up being this huge gust of wind that comes through and blows this umbrella that she's using away from her, and it flies through the air, and Jiro's actually the one that ends up catching it. And we have to see him like wrestle the umbrella to the ground, which is just kind of funny, and wrestle it closed. And he interacts with the girl's father and returns the umbrella, and then the girl goes and talks to the girl goes and talks to her father, and he's like, I wanted to thank him. He's like, it's okay, he's staying at our resort, it's fine, or he's staying at our hotel, we'll see him again. And they have this and basically what ends up happening is they have kind of this like, things keep getting in the way of things. It's like she kind of recognizes him a little bit, and he maybe recognizes her a little bit. Spoiler alert, she's Naoko, the girl from the beginning of, the girl that he helped on the train and everything like that. So spoiler alert there, not really. But what ends up happening is Jiro and her have like these moments where it's like they almost meet but they don't quite meet. And then one day while he's out walking around again, he ends up finding her like paint supplies in the forest, and he's like, or the little forest area, and he follows a little man-made stream area to a spring where he finds her, and she actually reveals to him that, yes, I was very, I know that it's you, and I wanted to thank you for, not just helping the other day, but helping us all those years ago. And he's like, oh my god, it is you. And like they have like that recognition thing where they finally figure out that, oh, you are the one that helped us and everything like that. She's like, you haven't changed one bit, you look exactly the same. And so they start to have like this little bit of, there's this romance starting, and while they're on their way back to the hotel, unfortunately there's like this rainstorm that comes through, and like they're both hiding under the umbrella as they're like walking through the rain. And it's this beautiful sequence of just like how Studio Ghibli does rain sequences and water and everything like that, for like the different ways that they've animated water over the years based on what they're trying to show with the water. And it's just like they're getting soaked in the rain. And she's like, we looked all over you for years trying to find you, and like the maid is gonna be so happy that we found you and everything. And and like, so she's like, you were our knight in shining armor. And he's like, I was. And she's like, yes, I very much recall you being on a white horse. And they're like joking and everything like that. And having just like little like flirting moments with them, back and forth as they're under the umbrella. Like the storm kind of passes. Place has weird weather, giant gusts of wind, and then the random rain. I'm just like, okay, someone needs to be paying more attention to the weather radar. And what ends up happening is, the rain kind of clears up, and they have this beautiful rainbow. And then her father shows up, and she's able to introduce Jiro to her father. And the father is like, oh, so you were the young man that helped us all those years ago, very much, thank you, and everything like that. And while they are there that night, they're supposed to all have like dinner together, but unfortunately Naoko ends up being sick. And what ends up happening is Jiro ends up meeting this man whose name is, if I can find the information here, Kaspar is the man's name, and he is this German. And he's, staying at the resort and everything like that. And they end up, Jiro and him kind of end up, developing a friendship, because he recognizes that Jiro has, like, been to Germany and everything like that. So they end up, kind of developing this nice little friendship. And Kaspar is basically telling him, he's like, Germany is going to blow up soon. And so is Japan, given everything that's been going on and how militaristic and everything like that. So it's, Kaspar is like a German expat, as in like he fled Germany when he saw what was developing there in regards to, certain political and military groups on the rise. He left because he didn't support it. And he ended up finding his way to Japan. And so he's, kind of somewhat in hiding. And what ends up happening is, so him and Jiro kind of develop a friendship. And kind of, Jiro's father kind of, develops a friendship with him as well in that regard. But what ends up happening is while everything is going on, Jiro kind of ends up having this what ends up happening is there's this. Okay, so basically what happens is Jiro and Naoko basically end up flirting with airplanes. I'm not joking. They basically end up flirting with like paper airplanes because Jiro makes this little paper airplane based off of like just like the rough design of what he wants to make, and he uses, he lets that fly. It gets stuck. He tries to get it free. Naoko sees this. Well, she's still somewhat bedridden, but outside getting fresh air. And basically what happens is the airplane gets, knocked up to her, and they keep, flying it back and forth and everything. And, other days he makes more elaborate versions of, like the airplanes, and uses them to like, fly up to her and everything like that. And they start, flying the little plane back and forth and everything. And Casper is kind of watching as they're like flirting with each other with the airplanes, which is just adorable, and he like very much approves. And what ends up happening is like one night they're having this nice, kind of dinner party at the resort, and Casper is like on the piano, and he plays like this German song, and he's very happily singing it. And both Jiro and Satomi, who is Naoko's father, start singing along with it and everything. And do not ask me the name of the song. I do not know the name of the song. I know that it's in German. But I don't think it's supposed to be like a bad song, because Casper is supposed to be like this kind of, sympathetic character in that regard, that he's not part of the German government at that point in time, and he's kind of fleeing from it. And so like the three guys kind of have like this good friendship, and Naoko comes down to dinner, and Jiro goes over and talks to her, and she explains to him that she has tuberculosis, and she's like, I have tuberculosis, and it killed my mother 2 years ago, and now I have it. And I want to still spend time with you. And Jiro's like, well, let's get married, let's, he proposes to her, and he very much wants to be able to spend whatever amount of time he can with her. And so we have like this, she agrees. And like, so we see, Satomi is like getting, congratulated by Casper and everything. So like, they're having that nice little friendship there and everything. And we cut around where we get to see like Jiro and Naoko just kind of enjoying themselves at the resort and just spending time together as like an engaged couple, and relaxing and having fun and everything. And him, going out and like watching her when she paints and everything. So we have that. And we know that at some point Mr. Casper leaves very suddenly without even saying goodbye. And they don't know why. Secret police found him is what happened. And he's on the run again. I don't know if he's based off of an actual person. I think he might be, but I wouldn't know who. And so it's, Jiro returns back to his workplace, where he's, spending time working on the airplane design and everything, and, talking with Hongo and everything. And what ends up happening is at one point it's revealed that the secret police have shown up, and they want to speak with him, and Mr. Kurokawa kind of, hides him away. They hide him in a certain part of the building where other people aren't going to, where, like the secret police won't know that he's there, type of a thing. And then Mr. Kurokawa is actually like, they're on their way, they kind of sneak him out of, Mr. Kurokawa and the guy who's the owner of the place. What was his name? Hattori is the name of the guy who runs the company, I believe. Not to be confused with the pigeon from One Piece. But what ends up happening is, they kind of sneak him out of the workplace, and while they're on their way, trying to figure out where he can go, he's like, well, I need to go by my apartment and pick up some stuff. And there's like, the police are going to be waiting at your apartment. And he's like, Kurokawa was like, well, you'll come and stay with me, come and stay at my house. And he's like, okay. And they're like, well, what is it that you need to pick up? He's like, it's, letters for my fiance, as mail for my fiance. And both of the guys, along with the chauffeur that's driving them, just all start laughing so much because they find it so funny that Jiro is actually engaged. He's like, oh my god, you're not a robot. We thought you'd marry an airplane. And like, just them laughing so much, which is just hilarious. And Jiro's just like, this is what I get for being so enamored with airplanes. So like, they have that interaction, which is just so funny. And they're like, no, you're gonna come and you're gonna stay at my house for the time being. And they get him to the house, and he stays there for a little while, but he ends up getting, there's a telegram that comes through, and it's about Naoko, and it is that she had a lung hemorrhage. And Jiro just, is like, okay, I have to get to Tokyo now. And he, rushes out of Mr. Kurokawa's house and makes his way to the train station. And like, he's like working on stuff while he's on the train to Tokyo to get to, Naoko's residence. And he, gets his way there as fast as he can. And he gets his way to her going through like the back garden instead of the front door. And, just like how, we get to see them, reunite and, that whole bit there. So that's just kind of sweet. And, the dad shows up a little bit later. Satomi shows up, and he's like, huh, yeah, I guess he did show up. Well, that's good. And he's supportive of their relationship. He can tell that Jiro very much loves Naoko and everything. But he also is like, he wants his daughter to be happy, but he also wants his daughter to try to get better. So it's kind of like, double-edged sword there. It's like, well, if she goes to the sanatorium, which she decides that she is going to go to the sanatorium up north in the mountains, where she can get treatment and be like in like the nice fresh cold air, because that was one of the ways that they thought was a good way to like treat tuberculosis at that point in time. Since they didn't really have any other method of trying to treat it at that point in time, that was the main thing that they could come up with. She ends up going there, and stays there for a while. And Jiro goes back, and he's working on the project that ends up becoming the Zero Project, the fighter plane. And we have this moment where like he's assigned to this, and he has to go and he has to meet with like the government advisors for it, and then he has to go and who are just like these very old men. They're just like yes, and then he has to go and talk to like the military people or the Navy or whoever they are, and they're just like shouting and yelling and everything like that, and Jiro is just like sitting there. And then like, because Mr. Kurokawa was with him, and then they're on their way out of the meeting with the military guys, and he's like, you didn't hear, you weren't listening at all, were you? Nope. Okay. I love that bit. They get some really good laughs in this movie, and there's other very poignant moments, as well, as is the point of most Miyazaki movies. They will have very poignant things and very funny things within the same movie, the same way that like so many other authors and directors and everything like that will do, where they have like exceedingly funny things that happen, and then very sad thing that happens that like tugs at your heartstrings as the story goes along. One Piece is very good at doing that. If I can point at the correct posters, One Piece is very good at doing that. As is actually DC Comics in some cases as well, and Disney. So Pokemon can also do it too. Moving on. And what ends up happening is, so we see him talking with the design team about what they're going to be developing and how they're going to be doing this, different ideas and everything like that, and like the way that he's describing the planes and everything, and like how this visualization sequence that they have, and even Mr. Kurokawa is like very energized by this, in regards to being very motivated and inspired by this. after, working in this industry for so long. He's just very much, inspired by this and everything. And like Jiro kind of comes up with some of these other instances that he, kind of helps to like fix certain problems that were happening on other planes and everything like that, for like how to cut down on drag and how to make maintenance hatches easier to get to and different things like that. Like we see him and Hongo talking back and forth about their projects and everything like that, and inspecting them, and trying to implement each other's ideas as they can, and everything like that. So they end up having those instances. And what ends up happening is, while this is going on, Jiro and Naoko are, communicating back and forth with, letters and everything like that. And what ends up happening is Naoko ends up kind of leaving the sanatorium, making her way to where Jiro is, and he meets her at the train station, because he has to like rush to the train station when he finds out that that's where she is. And then gets her back to the Kurakawa residence, where they are, where they're introduced to, where she's introduced to Mr. and Mrs. Kurakawa and everything. And, they make the request to them of, can Naoko stay here? And, the wife's like, well, we have plenty of room. And Mr. Kurakawa is just like, it's not, regardless of whether or not we have the room, I cannot abide an unmarried couple living under my roof. And then Jiro is just like, fine, then we will marry tonight. And Mr. Kurakawa is like, what? And the wife's like, okay. And the wife's like 100% behind this. And they're like, just whole instance where like Kurakawa is just like, is this really what you want to do? Yes. Okay, fine. And the wife takes Naoko off to go and get her ready for like this very traditional marriage ceremony with like the boss and his wife as their witnesses and everything. And so we, and what ends up happening is Kurakawa actually talks to Jiro, and he's like, if you really love that girl, you would put her on the train in the morning and send her back to the sanatorium where she can be treated. And Jiro is just like, well, then I'd have to give up the fighter plane project, because if she leaves, then I'm going with her. And Kurakawa is just like, you're an idiot. And Jiro has basically just been staying at the Kurakawa residence for a while at this point in time. Given the fact that he is now working for the government, I don't think he is being investigated by the secret police anymore, but it's just like, he's here, let him stay here, and he can just ride to work with Mr. Kurakawa every day, and everything. And such, so they have it that they're all getting ready for the wedding. And, so we see Mrs. Kurakawa leading Naoko through, the outside part of the house, because there's parts of the house that are inside and outside, and I very much kind of like those design setups, leading her through, and like Naoko is in this beautiful kimono, and she just looks gorgeous, and, Mr. Kurakawa is like kind of watching as this happens, and he like runs back into the room and is all ready with like the tea ceremony set that they need. And he's, they get to the door, the wife gets to the door with Naoko, and she's like, I bring this girl who has traveled from the mountain to marry the man she loves. What say you? Type of a thing. And Mr. Kurakawa, I love this bit. He's like, what is it? It's something along the lines of like, if she still wishes to marry this, Joker, blah, 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 several insults, backhanded insults to Jiro, who doesn't even have his own home. And if that's what she wants, then fine, she can come in, type of a thing. And they bring, Naoko in, and, Jiro just looks at her, and he just thinks she's like the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. And he, carefully helps get her so she can, sit down and everything, so they can do the marriage ceremony with like the sake cups and everything. And, they thank Mr. and Mrs. Kurakawa for this, and for the fact that they've been letting Jiro stay there and everything. And, they're very welcome and everything. And Mr. Kurakawa actually starts crying, because he's like, you guys are so brave. And he's like, he is very supportive of this. And the wife is clearly very supportive in this regard. So, like, they have that set up. Shortly after that, Kayo, the sister, comes to visit. And she gets to know Naoko and everything, so they get to have like that nice bit there. And she's, kind of very, she kind of like, you know, she kind of like shames her brother, scolds him. It's just like, she needs to go back to the sanatorium. She needs treatment. She can't just stay here. She lays in that room all day long, and while you're at work and everything. And she like berates him, which I love. And all alone all day long. Well, because I mean, like Mrs. Kurakawa and the others can come in and talk to her and everything. And I think Mrs. Kurakawa actually does come in and like talk to Naoko a fair amount. And Kaio's like, and she's my sister now, and I really like her, but she's like trying to warn him about like the very possible horrific death that Naoko is probably going to have in regards to the fact that she has tuberculosis and everything like that, and that there's not really much of a cure for it at that point in time. And at this point in time, Kaio has, she's graduated from medical school and everything like that. So she's like, and I've watched people waste away because of this disease and everything like that. So she's like very concerned about that. And Jiro's like, we want to spend as much time together as possible. And we have this like cute sequence where, Jiro and her are just, Jiro and Naoko are just like kind of, having a little husband and wife moment where, she's trying to help take care of his clothes and everything like that after he gets home from work. So he's, stuff's all ready for the next day when he goes back to work and everything. And, they have this moment where he like has to work on like the blueprints again, and he like has like kind of like a shade tied around the lamp so it's not so bright for Naoko, but he can still work. And he like scoots the table all the way up next by her sleeping mat, and is like working on that. And she's like, give me your hand. And he like puts his hand down so he can like hold her hand with his left hand. And then he's like, writing and doing the calculations that he needs with like the slide ruler with his other hand, as he's like holding her hand. And she's like, please, don't let go and everything. And he's like, I'm not going to, and everything. I don't intend to let go and everything. And, so we just have like that nice sequence there with like them just, being, this married, marrying this nice, sweet little married couple moment where it's like him trying to give her comfort and everything. And he's like, oh, I can take like this ounce off of like a rib of each of these, the ribs and the wings and everything like that. And she's like, see, just holding my hand makes you smarter. I love Naoko. She's adorable. And, while all this is going on, he's working and working and working on the plane designs for the Zero project and everything. And eventually what ends up happening is it gets to time for the test flight. And, he goes back home and he talks to Naoko one more, he talks to her again, and he's like just so exhausted from it. And he lays down next to her, and he kind of just ends up like falling asleep right then and there. And she like, covers him up and like snuggles him, onto the bed, which I just like that moment there where she's like, trying to take care of him as best she can. And like the day of the test flight, Kaio is on her way back to visit again, and she's going to be there to, celebrate her brother's, triumph with, the plane and everything. And Naoko is, she's, feeling much better, and she tells Mrs. Kurakawa that she's going to go out for a walk because she's feeling a lot better. And, the room's still a mess. I'm sorry and everything. And, so she goes off. Naoko is leaving. She is leaving to go back to the sanatorium. And Kaio actually sees her on her way because, like, the bus passes by Naoko. And Kaio sees her, and when Kaio gets to, the Kurakawa residence, her and Mrs. Kurakawa rush to the room where the room is just clean with, all of Naoko's stuff has been taken, and she's like cleaned up everything else. And there's like three letters on the table, and it's supposed to be, I'm pretty sure one is for Jiro, one is for Kaio, and I think one is for Mrs. Kurakawa, or for the Kurakawas in general. And Kaio opens up her letter and starts reading it. And she's like, she's going back to the sanatorium. She's leaving. And she tries to rush out of the door, and Mrs. Kurakawa stops her. And she's like, no, don't do anything. Not until after she's on the bus or on the train and able to start making her way home, her way back to the sanatorium. This is what she wants. She wants Jiro to remember her the way that she was, not watching her waste away. And like Mrs. Kurakawa is very sad about this as well, because her and Naoko probably talked a lot and everything, and probably got to know each other a fair amount while everything was, while they were all, while Naoko was living there. And Kaio kind of runs out to the street, and she's just like, she's starting to cry too, because she really liked Naoko as well, but she's also seen the way that, this disease affects people and everything like that, that the sickness affects people. And while this is all going on, this is also, when Jiro is having the test flight for the Mitsubishi A5M, which is what ends up being the plane that he designs. And, they're having this, test flight, and it goes wonderfully. And, the pilot is so impressed. The military people are so impressed. Everything is off the charts with all of the planning and everything like that, and the hard work that Jiro put into this and how to design it as best he could. And it is a beautifully designed plane, and it flies wonderfully. And what ends up happening is he kind of senses something in the wind. Again, big sigh from the dog in the background. He senses something in the wind, and that like kind of distracts him a little bit, but like, he's, it goes wonderfly, and he's congratulated by Mr. Kurakawa and by everybody else that's there that this went wonderfully for the test flight and everything. And we see that, part of what ends up happening is, we kind of cut ahead a little bit to 1941, and Jiro's designs for the Mitsubishi Zeros, as they were called, is used, and even throughout the course of this story, even throughout the course of the movie, we have it that like Hongo and him have been talking about stuff for what the bomber was going to be used for, different things like that. And it's just like probably to bomb China, Cambodia, England, America, whatever, any ones that they would put as like Japan's enemies at that point in time, going into World War II and everything like that. And so Hongo, has been pointing that out. So it's like the fact that this is being used going into World War II for this is not surprising. And even at the beginning of the movie, when we're seeing stuff with Caproni and Jiro when they're talking in their dreams for the first time, we see stuff with like Caproni's, designs are being used for, fighter planes at that point in time, in what would probably be either World War I or something, another war around that time in the 1910s into the 20s range, for what those aircraft would have been used for. And so in this case, it's those flyers are the ones that are used for the kamikaze missions, that, as I said, are used in Pearl Harbor and are used in other areas, and other battles and incidents and everything like that throughout the Pacific theater, not just against the U.S., but against other countries as well that they were, that Japan was invading during the time frame. And we have it kind of shift to where in his dreams, kind of one last time, we have this moment where he's walking through, where we see like all of the planes heading off, and then he walks through this like kind of plain version of a graveyard where it's just, littered with like broken and destroyed planes, as he's looking at everything, and he sees Caproni there. And Caproni explains that he was haunted by the same thing for what his designs were used, for how his designs were used by the Italian military for the same things, even 20 some years ago. And, and they're just talking and everything. And he basically, Jiro's like, every single plane left and it flew beautifully, but not a single one of them returned. And, that's a lot. And by technicality, my grandfather on my mom's side was in World War II in the Pacific Theater, and possibly at some point had to deal with these planes at some point in time, or these types of planes. I don't know everything about his military history. I know he got a Purple Heart because he was injured at one point in time, but, you know, there's that connection there in that regard. But, you know, he didn't die or I wouldn't exist. Because all of my mom and all of her siblings were all born post World War II. But what ends up happening is, of course, you know, Caproni is trying to comfort Jiro, and he's like, you know, beautiful dreams, you know, his dream was nevertheless realized, and that airplanes are beautiful cursed dreams. Just going into that same concept of, you know, these are beautifully designed instruments and machines that are designed to fly and to try to bring joy to people, but they are being used to, you know, cause pain and devastation and destruction and everything like that. And, you know, so they have that kind of interaction there with the two of them, and Caproni's like, you know, there's someone else here waiting for you, and he looks down and he sees Naoko coming towards him. And, you know, she ends up, you know, telling him, you know, you must live, darling, you must live, and you have to keep going even without me here. And, you know, and she kind of gets, like, blown away by the wind to a degree, lifted away by the wind to show that she has died. And, you know, Jiro kind of continues this dream, and he's like, you know, I will live, I will keep going and everything. And, you know, Caproni and him kind of start walking off, and Caproni's like, come, I'll show you my house. I have amazing wine for us to try. So they just, like, head off that way in the dream. The movie ends in the dream sequence there. But, like, they have that whole setup of the movie is that concept of, like, these beautiful things, these beautiful inventions in regards to planes and other types of things have been, you know, kind of cannibalized and corrupted to a degree and been turned into these, you know, machines of destruction. But, you know, that doesn't mean that it's always the fault of the person who designed them in the first place. It's not always their fault. And the quote that I wanted to get to that I found in this regard that is very applicable to this, because it's actually from Miyazaki himself. It is from the documentary The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, which is actually a documentary that was made during the making of The Wind Rises. And Miyazaki has a quote in the movie that is, you know, people who design airplanes and machines, no matter how much they believe that what they do is good, the winds of time eventually turn them into tools of industrial civilization. It's never unscathed. They're cursed dreams. Animation, too. Today, all of humanity's dreams are cursed somehow. Beautiful yet cursed dreams. And that is very true. You look through history in general, and, you know, different inventions all over the place have ended up getting used for, even if they weren't if their original intention was not designed to be used for pain or to cause harm, they have been corrupted and turned into that. Airplanes, gunpowder, different things like that. In regards to animation, that has been done the same thing as well, because you can do so many different things with animation. You can use it to make beautiful stories like this, or you can use it to make propaganda against different groups or individuals. You can do the same thing when it comes to books. You can do the same thing when it comes to newspapers. You can do the same thing when it comes to, you know, videos and movies and everything like that. And television and so many other things like that, where it's like stuff can be started with like this very good intention, this beautiful idea, but it doesn't always end up meaning that it stays pure, that they end up being beautiful cursed dreams. You know, all the same. And that's not wrong. They're not wrong in that regard. But that's what I have for this. I do actually have to go through the cast list first, so let me do that first. So, for the English cast, for Jiro Horikoshi, we have Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Jiro Horikoshi. We have Hongo is voiced by John Krasinski. So the friend is voiced by John Krasinski. And Naoko is actually voiced by Emily Blunt. And I know that her and John Krasinski are married in real life. I do not know if they were married at this point in time. I could be wrong. I don't know. Mr. Kurokawa is voiced by Martin Short, which is just hilarious because Martin Short, I love Martin Short. He's so funny. Is voiced by Martin Short. Caproni, Mr. Caproni, is voiced by Stanley Tucci. Hattori, who is the guy who is the owner of the plane company, is voiced by Mandy Patinkin. So Inigo Montoya, for anyone who loves The Princess Bride as much as I do. Kaio is voiced by Mae Whitman, who has just been this. She's done a lot of different voice acting over the years, so you just kind of find stuff that way. Casper is voiced by Werner Herzog. I know he's like a very prolific actor, and I know that I've heard his name before, but I don't know exactly 100% a whole lot about him. Mrs. Kurokawa is voiced by Jennifer Grey, just another very, commonly used voice actress. Mr. Satomi, who is Naoko's father, is voiced by William H. Macy. And that's about it. There's not really any other ones in there. So that's what I have there for The Wind Rises. And yeah, I mean, I do very much love this movie. I'm like pretty much most of the Studio Ghibli movies I tend to very much enjoy watching and love watching and everything. One thing I've been thinking about is when I'm done with all the movies is going through and trying to put on like a timeline all of the different the ones that kind of take place in like the real world and like how or have like very historical time period around them and like trying to like set that up. So like that would not include Nausicaa or Howl's Moving Castle or Castle in the Sky because those are all entirely fantasy worlds. But like some of the other ones like this one and Grave of the Fireflies and even The Boy and the Heron all kind of take place around the same time frame with the same events happening in regards to like World War II. So that's what I have here. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. Brenda, you want to say bye too? Brenda says bye too. Bye.